Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 0. It's college football here on LeanTossup. We would be playing the CBS college football song right now, but I am definitely afraid of copyright law, so we're not going to do that. But it's pretty exciting. I'm pretty excited that we're here. We are here, of course, as always, with my co-host Buck Metrics. Are you excited for college football to finally be back?
My excitement is above level 0.
That is fair. I mean, yes, it's exciting that it's back. But the first game is Nebraska Northwestern. Like what? Like I mean, and they sent them to Dublin too randomly. Like whatever. It's college football. There's probably going to be one or two good games. The good games come next week and in mid next, like starting on Thursday night, we get a couple of really good games next week. But at least it's something. At least football is back. Real football that actually matters, not NFL preseason. All right. So before we get into the like 6 watchable week 1 games, let's talk a bit about our futures bets. So we've obviously, if you've been following along, which shout out to our viewers for following along and watching all of our podcasts. We previewed all the conferences. We put a lot of futures bets. We talked about a lot of futures bets that we liked, ones that we didn't like. Now we're going to talk a bit about a lot of those bets and and which ones we're making, which ones we talked a lot about a lot of bets. We're going to talk about which ones we're making, which books to make them on because there's a lot of difference in a lot of these books. Sometimes different books have completely different prices. So let's talk a lot about some of the bets we're going to make. So first of all, the most simple ones you make are obviously season win total bets. What are the teams that you've bet on, and which books have you bet them on them on?
Yeah, so I went to Las Vegas last week. Got these bets down, and one thing that was really interesting to me was the two biggest books out there are Circa Sports, who I mention a lot because I consider them to be the line of record, and the Superbook, which is at the Westgate. And when they had the HBO documentary a few years ago. On people betting on football. I think it was like the 2019 season. It was based at that book. It was really interesting. Um, and the thing that really stood out to me is they have very different models. Circa is very much seeking the market price. They have very high limits. They're a very fair book. They don't pull the shenanigans that other books do. They're the first line each week. They come out every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific time with a line on every college football game for that following week. So I consider them to be the line of record. They're the best arbiter of what the fair line is because they get the most money from the most knowledgeable bettors. And on the other hand, you've got Superbook, which is interesting in that I didn't know if it was kind of a sucker book or whatever, but I actually heard the manager John Murray on a pod recently, and he actually made an interesting case that he actually sets his lines not to balance his books, but actually to take stands. He made a point that he set a line on Michigan State that he knows is low, just to get action on the over because not unlike me, if you remember the Big Ten pod where I said I wouldn't be surprised if they actually finish 5-7, just kind of go down the elevator shaft. He's expecting the down year from Sparty. So two very different models. And I bring this up because we'll get into specifics later in just a moment. But one thing is interesting is some of my bets I put into three groups. The ones that are on the smaller group of five teams, Circa didn't make a market for them, which is interesting. I think that's probably because Circa thinks there's not enough activity to get a real market price and to really protect themselves and their model. So, your South Alabama's, UTEP's, and we'll get into more specifics later. That's one group. And what's interesting is I think that's also, clearly referring to or representing a more liquid market. And I think there's more value probably to be had in that. And when I did this analysis, those bets, I actually bet an average of 2.67 units per bet. And I compare that to the next group, which is very different in that if we consider Circa to be market value and Superbook to be somebody taking a stand, my next group of bets are the ones where I'm getting, if I compare what's available to market, assuming that Circa is market, I'm getting better than market. And for those, I basically had an average size of 2.33 units. So a little bit less because there's some liquidity there, but not as much. And the third group is the other one where basically I'm getting the circa number. So I'm getting market, I'm not getting a bad number, but I'm kind of taking a stand against John Murray at the Superbook because he does this for a living. And what's interesting is my average size of those bets is 1.75 units. And it's not like I sized these knowing this. It's just interesting that it's kind of encouraging that I've kind of sniffed out where there's intuitively a little more value based on the market and the activity and how much imperfection is in each line. Just an interesting little side note. And just one other thing, when we talk about the Superbook and him taking a stand, it really occurred to me what he's doing, John, the manager there. You've referred this to a couple times, and I've kind of thought of a really silly name for it. He's really looking to actively capitalize on brand-based market inertia and brand-based market hyperactivity. And we just talked about USC, and there are a lot of instances where you see the market line being above what I think is a fair line. And I think that's an example of the brand-based market hyperactivity. So interesting that somebody actually plays into that. And, clearly as we go through the early part of the season too, until we get our fully mature or mature and sufficiently mature in season data, a lot of these BBMI and BBMH candidates are kind of just, I think these future bets are a good list to start to say, hey, who's going to get overbet and underbet in weeks 2, 3, and 4? Your typical overreactions to the blank slates, or just a false confirmation of, hey, this team is actually just going to be just as good as last year. So little interesting little nuggets gained from comparing the two books. As to the actual bets that I made, let me pull this up real quick. So my season totals, just to remind everybody, South Alabama, and these are basically in order of preference. South Alabama over 6 wins. Clemson under 7 ACC wins. Clemson under 10 total wins. UTEP over 5.5 total wins. Oh, I love that. Just saying that out loud sounds good. UNLV over 4 season total wins. San Diego State, I actually got under 8. When we had talked about it, it was 7.5. It actually got to 8, which delighted me. Liberty under 7.5. Northern Illinois under 7, where you and I disagree. Oregon under 8.5. Going to actually make some money off my buddy Clay Helton as he ruins Georgia Southern. I go under 4 for their season total. Old Dominion Monarchs over 4.5. Kansas State over 4.5 wins in the Big 12. Purdue over 7. That was one where I got a real benefit from a line move as well. Tennessee over 8. That's one where I feel like a little bit of a sucker, but hey, whatever. Wisconsin under 9. I made a strong case for them on the Big 10, or against them on the Big 10 pod. And Texas under 8.5. Just another USC coach that's former USC coach that's going to do me a solid and going under.
Yeah, I think a lot of those I really like. Texas, obviously, I like Purdue a lot. San Diego State is another one we've talked about. There's a lot of ones I actually really like in that set there.
Yeah,
Um,
just update real quick on Texas too. Two things. They named Quinn Ewers a starting quarterback.
yes, I want to talk about this actually. Yeah, I
Okay,
wasn't sure when we were going to talk
please.
about this. Yeah, maybe next week. But yeah, we can talk about it now. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, good.
so they named. Apparently, the rumor was they were going to name Hudson Card the starter, but
Hmm.
then apparently he came out and said no, it's Quinn Ewers, which is very concerning because that's one very reminiscent of last year, and we saw how well that went. And also, apparently they had a bunch of injuries in a practice too, so that's also really bad. So the wheels are already starting to come off here at Texas. Uh, the thing of it is, the fact is, this kid was supposed to be, I believe he was a 5-star quarterback in last year's class coming out of high school. Ohio State snagged him. Basically he was favored to sign with Texas, I believe, because he's from the state of Texas. Ohio State snapped him up. Didn't play a snap at Ohio State because obviously C.J. Stroud went out and almost won a Heisman, is the favorite for the Heisman this year, so he transferred out. But again, though, at a certain point, like if you're sitting there and you're Quinn Ewers, and if you're good, Ryan Day's gonna come up to you, put his hands on your shoulder pads, and be like, "Hey, kid, like, look, we got like a Heisman winner right here. Just study under him for 2 years, and then
Yeah.
he's gonna get drafted like first overall in the NFL. Just like stick
Yeah.
around here for a couple of years, then this is yours." But either he didn't or that conversation never happened, and now he's in Texas and apparently not doing too well in Texas, which is very concerning because then that suggests the fact that it was a debate versus starting him versus Card, and we saw Card last year was not particularly good. He was the original starter. The reason they didn't start Casey Thompson was because they wanted Casey Thompson more time to develop, so that's why they put Card in, and then they put in Thompson, and they ended up going back to Card because Thompson was bad. So this guy was never thought of as the starter. The fact that he was almost named the starter suggests that Quinn Ewers is not as good as advertised, and that also then suggests that Ohio State wasn't like they didn't want to keep him around. So that's my take on it. And I mean, like I don't know, it's probably insane to bet against Texas week 1. That's probably insane because they're playing. What is it? It's like I don't even know what it. Who are they playing week 1? It's some insane. It's like some really lowly team. I think
Now
it's
be careful
like
when you say lowly team around me. Don't. I'm a
no. It's
big.
like UN.
I'm a group of five guy.
I know. What is it?
Um.
Is it's
All right, Louisiana Monroe. Yeah,
yeah,
truly a horrible G5 team. Yeah.
yeah. So okay, that's fine. But then next week though, they're playing Bama, and
Yeah.
like, what's the spread against Bama? It's like something massive. Is
17, I think, is what I saw.
that might be too low.
It is. Yeah.
Like I'm really 17 and a half. If I'm getting, I'm gonna again, I'm gonna get on FanDuel very soon. I'm gonna start betting some of these look ahead lines. Like that's a look ahead line. I'm really they have Washington State, Wisconsin, 13 and a half. Okay, I really like that line too. But
Wow.
yeah, I'm getting okay.
Okay, we got to settle down.
I still need to get this FanDuel account. But no, so I'm really eyeing that Bama line right there. So yeah,
Yeah.
so we're yeah, I'm is it, are you thinking the same thing too?
Yeah. The other thing, I guess I'll be a little nicer about it, which is unusual. Um, I think you can characterize this kindly as maybe just looking more towards the future than this season. Um, you know, great point about how bad did Ohio State want him to stay. Maybe he just got homesick. I don't know. I kind of think that Ohio State might have been a little upset when he reclassified and came out a year early and just kind of screwed up the entire quarterback room. Because I think actually when he came in, somebody left. So it kind of just really disturbed the whole continuity plan that they had there. Not that they're going to be hurting at quarterback, but it just you went from super smooth to all right, a little bit of transition turbulence to maybe navigate. Um, so I think I don't know. Does it cost him a win? Maybe not. Maybe it costs him two as he gets up to speed. It's interesting when you're looking at the early season. I think is where you're going to say what's the gotcha. There's no gotcha so far. But I talked before about let's put it this way: when we did the Big 12, I saw the Texas Tech game at Texas Tech as maybe a soft target, susceptible to a strike from the right team and kind of like Tim DeRuyter against a quarterback on the road in that spot. That's their first road game too. And Lubbock is not like the most normal place in the world to travel to. So that could be a really, really interesting game. Um, the other thing too is I heard somebody make a really impassioned case that Gary Patterson is really going to improve the defense. And I kind of buy that from afar until you look at just how bad TCU's defense was last season. God bless him for staying in football. I hope he's happy. It's just hard for me to think that I'm trying to get a narrative where you really get to anything other than the games really passed him by a little on defense since he was so good at defense forever. And I just think that there might be adjustments. Now, maybe if he's getting to very specific things, they might be a little help on the margins. But I've heard cases made about, yeah, he's going to take their defense to the next level. Can't see it.
That's an interesting point about Gary Patterson, and when we talked about Texas, we never actually did talk about Gary Patterson.
Yeah.
We talked about other like there's so many important things when you talk about Texas. We talked more about their transition to the SEC and where they are as a program. But the Gary Patterson thing is so interesting because yeah, I've seen a lot of that. Like you see a lot of these writers and people on Twitter be like, oh man, he's gonna go in there, he's gonna clean them up on defense. It's gonna be really good. But this is a guy who got fired from TCU.
Yeah.
Like this isn't like, oh man, this is like this amazing defense from TCU. He got fired from TCU, and he basically brought them back into the Power Five. Like TCU was in the wilderness, he brought them out of the wilderness. They got to, was it a Rose Bowl somehow? It was they won.
They won the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, they won it was a Rose Bowl they won. Yeah, I was like, how could they get to a Rose Bowl? But with the playoff, it
Yeah.
works. You get the bowls get rotated around. But no, like they won a Rose Bowl, and yet somehow we're like he got fired from that job without like usually you just retire and then they find someone new. They're like, no, we want you gone. And then people are like Texas like, oh man, this is such a great hire. I'm like, what? Like I don't like on some hand people are like this is gonna be really good, and you're like, oh, I guess it is. But then you're like, but wait a minute, this guy got fired. How is he really that good? So yeah, this could go far sideways, and yeah, no, I'm eyeing an under on Texas as well. Texas Tech is again one we talked about Texas Tech liking Texas Tech. I think this will kind of be a great transition into some other bets we have here. Kansas State is another team that they'll be playing Texas again. Texas will probably be favorites over most of these teams if I had to hazard a guess. So, what are some of the other futures bets, kind of conference ones that you have that you like?
You know, this is interesting. When you talk about that Kansas State game, it's at Kansas State. Um, I'm thinking that if that look ahead, I don't know if we have a look ahead on that. Texas probably is favorite. I think by the time we get there, I bet Kansas State is favored. I think Kansas State's going to shock people, or maybe not shock, be much better than people expect, and I think Texas is kind of still headed the wrong way, not nearly as good. Um, so just kind of a feedback on that. My favorite conference win total though is Clemson under 7. That leaves them just only one game to, one game of margin. And, you know, I'll put it this way. Is it more likely to win than not win? No. Is it more likely to win than lose? Absolutely. I think there's a pretty big margin for push, but the distributions I have it a lot more frequently below 7 than above 7.
Yeah, Clemson is an interesting one. We're both kind of out on them. We think it's possible that the Magic's gone a little bit from this Clemson team, from this Clemson side. Um, I just like for me personally, Clemson is like, I mean, they play Georgia Tech. They play a lot of kind of bad teams, but they have Notre Dame on their schedule. They have Miami. They have North Carolina State. They have Wake Forest. So that's 4 possible losses. Plus, they also have Louisville, a team they've almost lost to before. They do have Florida State. Florida State usually does play them close. So you're looking at 4 possible games. I think you're talking about the conference win total under they're basically their season win total under is under 10 as well. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a plausible path there for them as well.
And let
Uh
me just kind of just make one other point, just to kind of push my concept back to your face, even though it's really your idea. I think you're kind of starting from the whole paradigm of, yeah, Clemson the last 5 years. And I want to look at more like what the hell happened last year and then what's happened since. They were horrible on offense. Their quarterback is a stiff. Their offensive line is average at best. They've lost their offensive coordinator, their other offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator, their defensive line coach. If you look at their coaching staff, there's a lot of guys that haven't really worked in the same position anywhere else at a big time program. They could, I wouldn't just nibble at the margin, start use historical Clemson in the last 10 years and nibble at those margins. I kind of want to just take a whole step back and reset the paradigm on them and say, if this is a blind resume, what is it? And I have a really, really hard time getting to 10 season wins and 7 conference wins.
yeah. Honestly, like could this be his last season at Clemson?
Yeah, no.
Are you
Unless,
I
yeah,
mean,
no,
here's the
Alabama. Well, yeah,
we said the same thing last year about Lincoln Riley. We said the same thing last year about if you would have said that, but last year we would have said the same thing about Lincoln Riley. We would have said the same thing about Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. right? Like Auburn is looking for someone. If they give him a boatload of money,
Yeah, I forgot. We have to, yeah, have the Auburn discussion at some point too. But,
I mean, like like here's the obviously it's crazy. This is not
he
like we're
played at
not.
Alabama. He's gonna leave Clemson for Auburn? Isn't this like kind of one of the I'm not a Star Wars guy, but isn't this one of those storylines of Star Wars where
I guess. I mean, it's crazy, but like the thing of it is, like, if you're in Clemson, things aren't going well for you. You're in a league that's functionally dying.
yeah,
Maybe you jump ship, and if you're going to be looking at teams that would try to get him, Auburn would be on that list. There's a couple other teams I could think of too, but Auburn would be number one. Texas would possibly like if this goes badly for Texas. I don't know if you want to have I don't know if you want to have Sarkeesian stick around for Archie Manning season one. So I don't. Maybe you bring Dabo and you say just fix this. I don't know. I don't know. This is that could get really interesting. All right, so conference championship bets. So what are some other ones you have here? So we talked about Louisville. We actually do kind of like Louisville. Um, we can get some insane price on that. Kansas State as well. What about UTEP or South Alabama? Are we you betting on those or not?
I bet him. I bet North Carolina, UTEP, or South Alabama. But the thing that really stood out to me was on those three, there was no action. They were at the same odds as what they opened, or they're actually up by the time I made my bets. Louisville kind of going the other way had gone down from 40 to 30 at the Superbook and from 2250 to 1750 at Circa, which I take as a double good sign. Money likes them enough, especially to move them at Superbook, which is more of a take a stand book. And then if I'm actually getting better than market, if Circa has them at 1750, if I'm getting that almost double that, I think that's a really solid bet. Um, similarly for Kansas State, down from 1340, what they opened to 940. And what's interesting here too is speaking of Kansas State and opening at 1340, guess who opened them a little higher than that? Um, my friends at DraftKings opened them at 5,000 plus 5,000. And you know what? You know why their stock price is down like 70% this year? It's because their CFO is arguing with short sellers on Twitter instead of figuring out and making sure that he has people that are setting lines that actually understand football. What an embarrassment. I mean, how far off are you and how can that go through a review process and you're off by that much? This isn't, some crazy Cinderella out of nowhere like Baylor where nobody expected them to do anything. I mean, if you actually have your ear to the ground, I mentioned this before. Smart guy Twitter loved Kansas State, and the fact that they were so far off, just this is why their stock price is down. This is why they have to do stupid things like limit people to $7 per game because their risk management people don't know what the heck, and they rely on people like us and use our intellectual property to really set their lines. End of sermon, end of rant. DraftKings, burn in hell.
Yeah, and that is the interesting thing, right? Because and I've seen a couple of podcasts with some of these guys who set the lines, and they don't view like I think people who are like recreational bettors and stuff. I think they view sharp bettors and big money bettors. It's like, oh man, the books must hate those guys, and actually they don't. They actually love sharp guys. They love it when someone comes in on like a Tuesday and says, "I'm going to put
Mm-hmm.
$120,000 on Detroit plus 3.5." They're like, "That's great, thank you." And they're like, "We'll gladly take that money and then move a line down to three." Like that's the thing, right? They
Yep.
actually love that. They just like they'll take that because it's whatever the return on that is. Fine, let's say 110,000. They'll give you the 110,000 or the 100,000, and they'll be like, "Cool, that's your consulting fee. Thank you for that. You told me this line is bad. I'll move this line." And this
Yep.
happens a lot in spread totals, in spreads, in totals, in player props. They view it as a consulting fee. They're like, and I saw one of the guys who was on a PFF podcast. They were interviewing him. He's like, I view it as a consulting fee. He's like, I've moved lines for $100,000. I've moved lines for $10 because if it's a certain guy and he bets $10 on a line, we move that line, right? Like that's the thing. And I aspire to be that one day for Call of Duty. I want to, like, when I bet a Call of Duty spread, I want that line to move. We're getting there, but no, this is the thing, right? So no, like they view it as a consulting service for sure. Like they view it as a consulting service. So it's actually a really cool. It's a really, like, don't think of it like when you think you're taking advantage of a book, you're actually not. You're helping them set the lines, because the thing of it is, while we're sitting here and we're talking about these lines, and obviously we're putting this out publicly and people are listening to it and betting off of that, you are not, if you're listening to this, you are not the average bettor. Now obviously, specifically this podcast, relatively small, but even if you're listening to just generic betting podcasts, you're still not the average bettor. The average
Mhm.
bettor is walking in, waking up Sunday morning, flipping on their phone, being like, I like the Cowboys, I'm going to bet the -3.5, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's what the average bettor is doing. They're
No, they're
not.
living, breathing, brand-based market
Yeah,
inertia.
exactly. They're not, like, we set the lines that they bet. We take all the things, we leave them with the scraps, is how this goes. Right?
Mhm.
And like you see a lot of, like, the lines for the NFL have moved substantially since earlier on in the even since August. I mean, the Baltimore New York Jets line, it's open Baltimore -4.5. It's up to 7. Now, to be fair, that's with Zach Wilson injury news. But even before then, it was up to, even just after his injury, it's only moved from 6 to 7. It was already up to 6 before he even got injured. So it just goes to show you how much these lines move, because there's been a ton of money in a lot of these markets. So yeah, the sharp betters actually help books more than people think. We don't just take money from them. They actually love the money, that they love the money and the action we give them. All right.
Oh,
So
so just a couple more futures, sorry, the
mhm,
season,
yeah,
the conference champs.
yeah.
So, I'm very high in Miami of Ohio. They actually have dropped from +550 to +470 at Circa. I still like them just because they've got the easy path on their side of the MAC, and they have the best conference in the entire, or the best QB in the entire conference. But it's encouraging to see that I'm not the only one that's thinking that way. Um, then there's something that really interesting that happened in the Mountain West Conference. So Circa opened up 5 teams: Boise, San Diego State, Fresno, Air Force, and Utah State, all in a tight little band of +345 to +460. And then since then, Air Force dropped from +410 to 385. I bet them. I wanted to bet Air Force and Fresno both because I saw that as being the 2 teams that were pretty clearly gonna be in the MAC title game, or the Mountain West title game, and Fresno got hammered all the way from 370 to 270, even with just surprising in that tight little, band that somebody got hammered that much, that quickly. So I didn't bet Fresno State, but, with so many contenders, I think that's a pretty significant move on Fresno State. I couldn't back him at that price and play him and Air Force, and I really like Air Force. I think who came out on the wrong end of that is Utah State. Utah State's actually, or odds went up to like +650, I think. So they're kind of the odd man out there. I still think somebody put it really well on Twitter, and it's kind of common sense, but it's good to verbalize that if you're looking at a futures bet and you can't find the bad bet, then don't make a bet. And in this one, Boise was actually favored. So I think that, I'm really bullish or bearish on Boise. I think that their presence and their money still makes it bettable if you like Fresno or any of the other teams. But just kind of an interesting little, interesting big move within that small group.
Yeah. Um. All right. So now I think the probably the market I think most people care about, or one of the markets people most care about most in college football, is the Heisman, obviously. So this, it gets a ton of attention every year. Obviously, right now, I'll just read off kind of the top favorites here for the Heisman. Um, First up is, well, look, depending on which book you look at, I'll look at, let's do Bet365, my main one. C.J. Stroud at Ohio State is +200. Their quarterback Bryce Young, the Heisman winner from last year, he's +350. Caleb Williams at USC +700. Bijan Robinson, running back from Texas, is 20-1. Will Anderson, Alabama, that's their wide receiver, he's 20-1. DJ Uiagalelei, +250.
Excuse me? What was that?
DJ
Is
Ul
there a question mark at the end of his name, or is that you?
Uiagalelei. I don't. Yeah,
Uliandale.
Youngale, yeah.
Wow, he's on there?
Yeah,
I don't even
25 to 1. That's horrible. Wow, that's just horrific. Jameer Gibbs, Alabama 25 to 1. That's their new running back. Quinn Ewers, Texas 28 to 1. That's also horrible. Dylan Gabriel 30 to 1. He's Oklahoma's quarterback. That's less horrible. Jackson Smith and Njigba, that's Ohio State's wide receiver 33 to 1. That's not horrible. Tyler Van Dyke, Miami, Florida, that's 40 to 1. That's not bad. And then it keeps going down.
mm,
Trayvon Henderson, I think that's Ohio State's running back. I
yeah,
think. Yeah, that's
yep.
40 to 1. Anthony Richardson, Florida is actually so. Okay, I'll stop it there. That's actually one I don't hate. Actually, 50 to 1. That's not bad. He had moments of brilliance last year. If they're able to beat, like, here's the thing: if they are able to beat Georgia and basically win, if they're able to win the SEC East and then lose to Bama in, like, so this is the thing, right? For when you're betting the Heisman, you have to think what gives them the award, right? Like, what are the barriers for them winning the award? Like, what do they have? How many games do they have to win? Which teams do they have to beat? Like, for example, last year, I think if CJ Stroud had beaten Michigan and then obviously won the Big Ten, I think he probably would have won the Heisman. I think.
It's a lot closer. It's a very tight race, I think. Yeah.
Well, see, my thing last year was I was always worried about Bryce Young because I felt like they didn't give it to Mac Jones, and I feel like because Mac Jones was doing so well in the NFL, they were like, oh shoot, we should have given it to Mac Jones. We should have given it to the quarterback. So they're like, fine, let's just give it to the current quarterback from Alabama, even though he was like I don't know, people love Bryce Young. I'm not the biggest like he's good, but he's not like amazing. He's not my favorite quarterback. Like he he's not amazing. Like I don't know. I'm still a little iffy on him. He's good, but like he's not. I'm not completely taken with him. But CJ Stroud, I love CJ Stroud a lot better than Bryce Young though. But this is the thing. I don't think they're going to give it to Bryce Young twice in a row. I mean, am I crazy to think that the only reason they gave the Heisman to Bryce Young is because they regretted not giving it to Mac Jones? Is that crazy or is that like maybe a
Mm.
legitimate thing?
I would actually not even try to ascribe logic or reason to Heisman voters. Some of the arguments I hear are just the dumbest things in the world.
That's
So
a good point, actually. That's a good. I mean, we should never assign anything to Heisman voters and or the college football playoff committee. They just randomly decide things. So like this matters this week, and next week it's not going to matter. So that's a good building block. But all right, what are some of your favorite Heisman bets? So I don't hate Anthony Richardson at 50 to 1. I feel like it's kind of a bet on Florida. The thing of it is, like, if you're looking at it, if they were to beat Georgia and win the SEC East, do they have to beat Alabama for Anthony Richardson to win the Heisman, or if they lose to Bama, can he still win the Heisman?
he can. I think you're betting on some improbable wins.
Fair, that's fair.
And to be really mean, I think you're also betting on voters not watching him try to throw the ball.
Wow,
Okay. So
that's
sorry.
harsh. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I don't hate that though. It's not a bad. We'll have to see. I don't know. I'm a little higher on Florida than I think other people are, but I could see him having a half decent year. What about Malik Cunningham from Louisville? This is kind of a new. He. You have to give him comparisons to Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson did win the Heisman twice at Louisville. Do you like that bet or not, or do you just think like at what do they need to do? Like, is it like if you bet Louisville to win the division, like to win the division and win the conference, is that not functionally just a bet on the same? Like, if they do that, then obviously he'll win the Heisman. But then you're just like, there's no point in betting a 4,000, like a plus 4,000 and a plus 6,000. Like, okay, one will hit and then the other, like, right? If that makes sense, right? Like, just bet one instead of betting both, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as he's been kind of my North Star that's guided pretty much my whole ACC outlook. I'm kind of feeling kind of silly I didn't grab him at plus 6,000. Maybe I already have enough tied up in Louisville to win the ACC. Um, I don't know. Maybe that difference is the Delta is just insurance, and in terms of their non-conference games. Don't know. They can still win the ACC with 2 losses, but I think if Louisville loses 2 games, then it comes down to, okay, who did they win? Who did they beat? Who did they lose to? And do they have a real kind of signature, whatever? Now, I'm super high on him, and I think that he could definitely have one of those crazy 500-yard, 7 touchdown games just out of nowhere in a big spot, and just maybe in an otherwise dead week, just completely get into the Heisman conversation literally out of nowhere. So I think there's, the more I'm talking about, the more I'm feeling stupid not grabbing some of him. when I was there. What does that book have him at?
Bet 365 66 to 1.
Okay.
Uh the FanDuel 80 to 1. So
Yeah. Circa has him
definitely.
at 6,000 at 60.
Huh.
So there's value on both of those.
Yeah, I might look at the 80 to 1 on FanDuel, but uh the other one is other one I think you were mentioning before is Jameer Gibbs. He's actually got a lot of steam here. He opened up really high and he's down to like 12 to 1 now. I'm seeing him 12 to 1 depending on the book. Uh yeah, he's 12 to 1 on or sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, 25 to 1 on Bet365 and he is 50 to 1 on FanDuel. So still kind of low there on FanDuel. What's the case for him as Heisman?
Um, he was by far the best player on Georgia Tech, which is, not saying a lot, but he was very, very good, very talented, had to do basically everything by himself on offense. They've raved about him at Alabama. They're talking about throwing to him as well. Um, I think from what I've heard, Stephen Godfrey report, the way he puts it is Alabama's going to be a lot more smashy this year. Probably throw a little less and be a little more conservative and run a lot more. And I think that he fits into that perfectly. He's got a very good combination of quickness, breakaway speed, and strength. Not super strong, but for one of those guys that's very strong for his size. Um, I'm thinking also that probably Bill O'Brien wants to just run the hell out of him just to get out of Alabama and get his own head coaching job. I got him 60 to 1 at the Superbook. And actually Circa has him at, let me see here, at 30 to 1. They actually have him as like the eighth or ninth choice overall. So there's really good value there. My guy actually has him at 12. I think my guy sometimes I just think he's trying to balance out somebody else's books by posting these weird numbers. 12 is ridiculous, but 60 is I think great value. Um, I'd be a little surprised if he's not actually in the conversation by the end of October.
Well, from what you just said, if Alabama's going to throw the ball less, then that eliminates Bryce Young, right? Right off the
Hmm.
bat, which was it's like Bryce Young opened as the co-favorite on for the national for the Heisman, and like that's just really
Yeah.
bullish. But he's faded now. He's down to 400 plus 400 compared to Stroud plus 200. But and this is the thing. So if Bryce Young is out because they're going to run the ball, yes, it can be more smashy. Which again, Bill O'Brien is also another Nick Saban rehabilitation project because he was also Houston's head coach. So the head coach for Houston, he got fired, and then Houston's been in the coaching wilderness, but that's mostly self-imposed because they keep firing whoever their head coach is. So also that's by the way, we'll just throw out an amazing prop bet here. If you have the bet in your book, first head coach to leave their or because they had to phrase it differently because it used to be first head coach to be fired, but then because of what happened with John Gruden, they're like first head coach to leave their permanent position, like leave their position permanently. You had to work. They had to weird it differently because technically no one was fired first. He just left or whatever. But uh, uh, Lovey Smith for Houston, 40 to 1. That number, like the next closest was like Matt Rule, which Baker Mayfield might save his job. That's a very strong definition. That's a very stretch of the word save, but it doesn't really say keep them long term successfully, but at least it keeps them alive. Love, like they fired their head coach last time. There was rumors that the Texans wanted to hire, I can't remember who it was. It was someone from there was someone they wanted to hire. I can't remember who it was, but it was someone like insane. And then they couldn't do it. So then like okay, let's hire Lovey Smith. And I think a lot of people think Lovey Smith's a one and done. He's gonna be another 1 year coach, and then they'll fire him again. 40 to 1 for him just being fired at the end of the year seems like really good value. Because like I can't outside of like if Matt Rule saves his job, Pete Carroll saves his job, or like I don't think they'd actually fire Pete Carroll. They're too deep into a rebuild to fire Pete Carroll at this point. So or Pete Carroll could just retire. But like I don't think they'd actually fire Pete Carroll. But outside, there's no real obvious candidates. Like half the NFL has had a new coach in the last like 2 years, so you can't. A lot of these guys aren't going to be fired. So he's one I could see. But anyway, that's beside the point. But back to your point, if you're saying that they're going to throw the ball, yes, then that eliminates Will Anderson, who's their wide receiver, who's another favorite up there on the board for Heisman, right? So, yeah, if they're going to do smash mouth football, Jameer Gibbs at 50 to 1 on FanDuel, that seems like pretty good value, especially when he's half that price on other books. Um, I think that's about it for Heisman. Again, the way to do it, and this is kind of the way I bet politics a lot, is you bet on kind of outer outcomes, and then as they come in, it then gives you freedom because if you have longer shot bets, then if you have them and then they close, then it allows you to start basically hedging out those bets. So if you're going to win a lot of money, if this outer one wins, but then it's possible that the favorite will win, then you can just unload on the favorite and you can still make money that way. All right, winning outright. So, what do you have for this? Obviously, national championship game. So, national champion, I'll just do FanDuel Alabama plus 180. That's way too high. That's too high in my opinion.
Plus
Ohio State.
180 is too high?
Sorry, too low. Sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
that number is way too low. Yeah, plus 180. Like what? That's a function like what? Plus 200 is what?
Just
Plus
2 to
200.
1.
Yeah, no, what's the mathematical number behind it of a plus 200? Plus 200 is what?
Would be 67%.
No, the flip of it. It'd be
Oh, it'd be 33. No, plus
33%.
200 would be, yeah,
33%.
67%.
Yeah. So that's just that's insanely high. So like I,
Yeah.
I can't get behind that. Like you're telling me that like one out of every three national championships Alabama wins it? Like it's just like there's so many question marks. Like there's a bunch of question marks on this team. They lost a lot. This team did lose a lot. Like so you can't just tell me that like they lost two of their best wide receivers, and they lost the national championship last year. Like why not have Georgia? Georgia lost substantially less. But Ohio State plus 300, Georgia plus 350, Clemson plus 800. That's insanely high, or insanely low. USC 20 to 1. Yeah, it's better. A&M 25 to 1. I don't think this is their year.
No, no, no.
They're getting there, but it's not. This is not their year. Maybe if they get a good quarterback. Michigan 50 to 1, Oklahoma 50 to 1. Definitely not. Definitely not either of those two. Notre Dame 60 to 1. They're just gonna get blown out again in the first round of a playoff. Texas 80 to 1. That's insane. Utah 80 to 1. Maybe
Yeah, that you could make there, but
that's a
what's the
case that could be
probability of
made.
that hitting? Yeah.
LSU 100 to 1. Wow, that's nuts. There's just no one. They don't have the talent this year. If that was the price for next year, maybe, but not this year. Miami, Florida 100 to 1. That's debatable. Oklahoma State 100 to 1. That's laughable. Penn State 100 to 1. That's also laughable. Tennessee 100 to 1. That's not horrific.
Yeah, no,
Wisconsin
I could see a path there.
Wisconsin 100 to 1. That's laughable. Florida 120 to 1. That's not bad. Well, I view that as not bad. Oregon 120 to 1 again. Not horrible. Arkansas 150, Baylor 150, and then you start getting like Kentucky, Mississippi.
Yeah.
Mississippi 151 is insane. Iowa, Auburn 200 to 1. Auburn and Michigan State have the same price. What does that tell you about Michigan State's future this year? That's insanely like that. Those should not be priced equally. But to be fair, when you're getting to that percentage tier, it's like it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
All right. What are your thoughts on this one? Do you see where do you see the value? Like. I kind of like Ohio State. Maybe a Utah at 80 to 1. That's kind of not bad. Because again, the thing of it is like the decision I tried to do last year. I was unsuccessful in it, but if you can bet long shots as to who's going to make the playoffs, then you can instantly hedge out your bets, right? Like if you put on something on Utah at 80 to 1, and then
Yeah.
they make it the playoff, right? Because all they have to do is just win the Pac-12. Then all of a sudden they're in the playoff. They're not going to be 80 to 1 to beat Ohio State. Sure, maybe they're like plus 300, but like that's still better. You could hedge it out, or you could bet on spreads or whatever. So you definitely would not be as screwed.
What's tricky about that is, and I'll give you a great example. When Hawaii actually made the Mountain West title game, I actually before that season bet them to win the Mountain West, and it was a very good bet. I also had the over that season. They covered that I think before even we got to November, and so they get to the Mountain West Conference game, and they're facing Boise State, and they were such a crazy underdog that I couldn't even hedge it. Literally, my book didn't even give me a money line that I could hedge. So that's the one thing to be a little careful about when you're taking these long shots and think you can hedge it. Number one, you might not be able to. Number two, it might take a brick of cash to kind of fully hedge yourself. But you bring up a good point. I think that, it's just really just saying who can you see getting to that fourth spot, and then maybe hopefully, thinking that it's hedgeable. That's interesting. I haven't really thought of it that way.
Well, for me specifically, because one of the books that I have, and I'll mention this. I don't know for our listeners. I'm not sure exactly which books you do use, but one of the ones is it's a UK book called Betway, and what happens is they have it's called the Parlay Club. So if you bet $25 on a parlay. Or through parlays, you can bet like 10 on one, 25 on another, or some combination of that. But as long as they're a three-teamer, and again, this is on any sport, like physical sport. They also have an esports version of this too. But if you bet $25 on a three-team parlay that pays plus 200 or more, which is very easy, you can even do like you could do more, right? You could do like four-teamer that pays over plus 200. If you bet that, even if it loses, you still get a free $10 bet. So at that point, what you can do is you can then you could bet that, and it's a free $10 bet. So what happens is that's an amazing thing to have to be like, cool, that's going on Utah, right? And that's perfect, right? Because it's
Mhm.
great if Utah goes there. If Utah wins a national championship, that's $800. Right, like that's insane off of a free bet off of 20, and you could have won the parlay too, right? So you could have won the parlay, which is 25. If you bet 25 on the parlay itself, you're winning about 100, which again, you can stack a parlay, especially for college football. You can get a couple money lines getting up there or a couple of good spreads or so. You could very easily cash that. So at that point, then you're now sitting at Utah to win $800. And then at that point, then you have a lot more flexibility in terms of that. So you could bet a couple of longer shot ones in that. Also, what you can do is another thing I've found to do with that is that in the off season, for the NFL, what you could do is you could once they have the lines for the next Super Bowl, you could bet on teams that before they make a massive offseason move. So what I did was when Brady announced his retirement, I put one on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 25-1. And then Brady re-signed and then they went down to like 10-1. So just insane closing line value on that.
Mhm.
Now, unfortunately, I got screwed because what happened was the Ontario legalized gambling. So then when they came to Ontario, they had to void every bet made before they came. So I lost it.
Oh my
But
gosh.
sad. But at the same time, though, amazing strategy, and that's not going away anytime soon, right? There's
Yeah.
quarterbacks are always going to be on the move, right? So that's an amazing strategy to keep for future years. All right. So that is probably it for our futures bets. Let's talk about it. We're finally here, week 0. These are games that are going to happen on Saturday. So Nebraska at Northwestern, the game we've probably talked the most about for just lack of having to talk about any other game to talk about. Nebraska is, well, they're minus 13. Depends on the books. I think there's some 12 and a halfs kicking around. They're mostly 13s. Um, Out of the 13 and a half on FanDuel, God, what a I mean, it's football. It's nice to start the game season off again, but just not the greatest game to start off the season with. Where are you like is this is just not bettable, right? There's better games later on that night, right? This is just you watch this cuz it's cool to have a game being played in Dublin. Maybe the game will look cool, but I don't think you could bet this spread.
I I don't think you can bet on Nebraska until there's like proof that they can actually match the metrics with what happens in the field. I mean, honestly, it just seems like if you're betting Nebraska, it's because you don't like yourself. It's just it just it's too much. I can't do it. Um, I definitely cannot bet Northwestern though. That's what's tricky. Northwestern was so bad last season. I mean, they were worse than Rutgers, and they're in the easier division of the Big Ten. Um, you know, part of me wants to say Nebraska should handle this easily, and then the other half of my brain is like, "Hey, dummy, did you forget the entire Scott Frost experience here?" Um, this makes it a fascinating watch. It's so hard to bet on this game. I'm definitely going to watch it at least just to see Casey Thompson and how he's doing in Nebraska. Um, you know, does that make a difference? I don't know. You can't, the thing about Nebraska is you can't even just look at it and say, have they fixed their problems? Because it's not like their problems are evident on every play. It's just like the least when you least expect it kind of thing. It's not like, okay, did they fix left guard? And there's 100 snaps every game where you see, yes, he's up to it, no, he's not. It's like, when is the snake going to come out of the toilet and bite you?
Yeah, it's gonna be like there will be a bad pick or like a ridiculous fumble or someone will bust a tackle and run for 80 yards or it's just gonna be hilarious. Like, how will they lose this? And this game is randomly being played in Dublin somehow. All right, like how do you know how you organize that? How are you like, yes, we're gonna play like Nebraska and Northwestern in Dublin. You would think it'd be Notre Dame or something, but no, it's not. Somehow it's Northwestern. Yeah, if you're rushing to the window to bet on Nebraska here, just get help. Just get help. I mean, I don't know. Like the thing of it is, it's interesting in the markets though, because like if you look at a couple of Nebraska lines later in the season, it feels like because we talk a lot about like regression to the mean, and Nebraska had a lot of bad luck last season, and this is a good example of it. The late season lines seem to just basically be like, okay, we know all these bad things happen in Nebraska, but we're just going to snap that back, and then they're going to like, if the bad things didn't happen, what would be the fair line? And I think that's a very interesting take for the books to have, and there could be some value in that, right? Like if Nebraska had performed to what we expected them to do, and they had won, I don't know, half the games they lost in bizarre fashions, they should be 14-point favorites. They'd probably be 21-point favorites in this game, right? And I think that's about right. So the question is like, can they act now? They actually, surprisingly enough, they actually covered this number against a couple of teams last year, like Buffalo. But again, it's not particularly impressive. Like they covered this spread against a couple teams, but I can't really, I don't have a ton of faith in them being able to do that against this Northwestern team. All right, other games. This is a fascinating one: Connecticut versus Utah State. The Yukon Huskies. So this is fascinating. We saw on Twitter here. Connecticut's defensive coordinator has apparently just vanished. He basically said he had to leave for family leave or personal leave or something. He's just gone. We have no idea where he is, and they have no idea when he'll return. So on FanDuel, you can get this at um, the line is Utah State minus 26.5. In other books, it's minus 27. Weirdly enough, I want that half point because like 27 is a feasible way this game ends. So, yeah, like Connecticut is not good, and Utah State is actually kind of good. And like even if you pencil in regression for Utah State this year, that's probably not going to come against UConn. So give me the I don't know what the Utah State is. Give me the Utah State
The
states.
Aggies.
Aggies. Okay. There's so many Aggies. I don't even know what an Aggie is. What is it?
It's a play on agricultural. I think they used to be
Oh,
Utah
okay.
A&M. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wait, A&M is athletic and marine, right?
No, it's agriculture and military.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. So much I need to learn about U.S. stuff. Okay. I thought it was like athletic and marine, but it's apparently agriculture and military. Okay.
Wow. That would be a tough school then when it comes to sports programs.
That's why I thought that was why they were good. It's like, oh yeah, that's the athletic and marine academy, but no, it's agricultural and military. All right. Another one that's kind of fascinating to me: Wyoming, Illinois. So it's Illinois at Wyoming. Why is Wyoming like? Wyoming is at home, right? Um, I think so, right? Yeah. No,
No, this is at Illinois.
this has Illinois. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes a bit more sense. But still, though, why Illinois minus 11? Like I'm looking at this, that the money line is plus 350 for Wyoming. I mean, I know it's a trap, but like, really? Like, that's. I mean, here's the thing. It's just that's just a really alluring piece of cheese there, right? Like plus 11 and plus 350 against Illinois. Like, yeah, Illinois is not good, and Wyoming's probably also not good, but that bad, really? Like, come on. I'm not crazy here. That like like it's probably a trap, but like that's a really good looking trap, though, right?
Yeah, I actually had Wyoming rated a little higher last season. But they lose a ton on defense. Um, I look at their defense. I've got four metrics for returning talent and different ways you slice and dice it, and they are among the least fortunate in all four metrics. So they might be in a bit of a, I hate to say this out loud. What I wanted to say is they might be a tough spot on defense. And then we look at Illinois, and their quarterback is Tommy DeVito. So I kind of just want to hit, just backspace and delete the sentence I just said. Because how tough can it be on defense if you're going as Tommy DeVito? Um, i- this might just be kind of like one of those who's the better coach about getting something out of little. I like Craig Bowl. I think like I said before when we did the Big Ten, I wasn't surprised by that Bielema did pretty good last year. But Bowl's a lot more experienced. As we talk about it, I might be inclined just to kind of grab that. Is it 11? You said?
11, 10.5 in on FanDuel. I just that's just I can't like it's just against my religion laying 11 points with Illinois. Like it just seems wrong. I don't know. That could be it's probably a trap and I'm going to be like that was dumb. But like
Man, I guess when was the last time that Tommy DeVito was in a game that wasn't a rock fight? It's if he was getting blown out, right?
yeah,
Um, I just I can he easily get to two score margin of victory? Now it's at home. Um,
Wyoming's not that far from Illinois. It's just an entire Dakota.
huh, when you're Newport Beach, everything's kind of far, I guess.
That's true. You're only like yeah, Wyoming's only a Dakota away from Illinois. Actually no, it's a Dakota and then a Minnesota. But it's not that bad though. It's like maybe a 2-hour plane ride. It's not that horrible. It's not horrible. You're probably closer to that than Ohio State. No, not that close. Closer to that than Penn State maybe. But not that. Yeah,
Yeah, I might make just a small bet on Wyoming. Is this one on TV?
maybe. If you have enough ESPN channels, everything's on TV, I think. That's my understanding of ESPN.
Yeah, because I'm thinking maybe if it's not on TV, I'll bet because I don't want to have to watch that game.
Yeah. That's if it's not on TV, I'll bet it. I
Yes,
don't want to see this game. I
it's
just want to know
safe.
if I
Yeah,
win or
no, I
not.
don't want to be tempted. It's on the Big Ten Network. At one Pacific. Yeah, I might just do that just as a small, just week zero fun, whatever.
It's too many points. That's too many
Yeah,
points.
it's more playable than the Yukon Utah State game.
Probably. That's I mean it's peak degeneracy being like, oh come on, Utah State, just grind out an extra touchdown. Um
Yes.
Charlotte versus Florida Atlantic. 7. The Florida Atlantic -7. This is kind of whatever. I think there's some play on Charlotte. Charlotte's come down a little bit. Charlotte was 7.5. Now they're down to 7. I don't know. This seems about right. I don't particularly love any side here, but Charlotte could win this. I guess. I don't know. What do you think on this? I think you're not particularly high on Charlotte.
No, I actually had them as the worst team in Conference USA, which actually probably puts them in the running for like a bottom 10 team last year. It's interesting though because their quarterback's pretty good. I think his name is Chris Reynolds. Their problem is on defense. They were a negative 16.6 last year. I see here in my notes that they have a new defensive coordinator, and I doubt it was because the old one was hired away. Um, I kind of see this is I'll just run this concept by you, and you could just poo-poo it away. I see a little bit of a smart guy insider of the BBMI, the brand-based market integrity. Will Healy is like considered to be some kind of like football genius because he did a good job. I forget where he was before Charlotte, and everybody fell in love with him. And I think they're expecting the same thing here, and he hasn't had the results yet. They're really not a particularly fun team to watch, and except for their quarterback. And their defense was so bad that kind of like Florida Atlantic. The other thing about Florida Atlantic was their defense or their offense isn't that bad. They have Nkosi Littleton, I think is his last name. I get him confused with the old guy from UCLA that played like 30 years ago. Nkosi Littleton, I think is his name. And he actually was very good when he dropped down from Miami to FAU. And I like what he's going to do in another year in the same system. I kind of am a Willie Taggart truther. I think that he did a great job at South Florida. He did a great job at Western Kentucky. I think he did a good job at Oregon. He had a so-so record, but he lost every game where Justin Herbert was hurt. He absolutely walked into a hornet's nest at Florida State, and I think he can coach. So he's got a lot less to work with now, but I think he's a better coach than Will Healy. And 7 point seems a little short to me. I if I'm gonna play, I'd play FAU. I'd probably want it to be under that 7 though. Seven's a lot better than 7.5.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Um, all right. This is what I know you care about. North Texas at UTEP.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right. I think we're both on UTEP here. We'll go with our minors. Um yeah, it's about even -110 on the money lines both ways. I think this was shaded. I think UTEP was plus 100. It was basically even, moved slightly again, not a huge difference between even -110, but it is still a difference though. That is a difference. Uh do you now there's a question here though. UTEP -110 plus 1 point -115. Money line or bust here?
Um, yeah, I think if it's when you're within a field goal, I'll just usually go money line if I'm on the dog. Um, I think didn't it open at like 4? I'm trying to just check that, and my computer's kind of just not cooperating here, but I think it opened at like 4. So did it not way back when?
I think something. Yeah, it was higher before. It's definitely come down.
Yeah, and I think that's probably due to not that there's copious headlines coming out of this kind of program like UTEP. Um, it opened it too. But I think, when people first look at UTEP, they think, oh, they lost Jacob Cowing to Arizona. That was their whole reason for success. So I think because North Texas wasn't that good. So I'm thinking they're probably thinking some regression there, which there might be at UTEP. But, you got a guy throwing him the ball who's good. And like I said, their second leading receiver actually had a pretty explosive yards per catch. So there's pieces there. I'm probably going to bet UTEP. The only reason I wouldn't is that I'm kind of tied to them already on my season win total, and this is kind of a fulcrum game, especially with the spread so close. But yeah, I'll probably make a small play on UTEP just for more fun.
That's fair. All right, Nevada and New Mexico State. Nevada -9, New Mexico State +9, and Nevada -340 on the money line. New Mexico State +270 on the money line. This is one. If I had to pick a game in week one that is a trap, this is the game that is the 1000% trap. Everybody is going to be betting on Nevada, and this
Hmm.
line has come down. I've seen this line come from, I believe it was 10.5 down to 10, down to 9.5. Now it's a 9. Nevada has lost a lot. This
Hmm.
team, watching them at the end of the season versus watching them in the bowl, was like night and day. They got crushed by a MAC team. This is a trap. Nevada, like I think Nevada could lose this game outright, straight up. Like if you're on Nevada in here, God help you. Um, yeah, I'm New Mexico State here. What about you? I mean, New
Yeah.
Mexico State is just this game is gonna be crazy. Something weird is gonna happen in this game, but like I can't see people betting on New Mexico. People are gonna be like, oh, Nevada's a good team, and then they're just gonna get obliterated. What do you think here?
So for some context, because I'm going to get carried away here in a moment, I did not bet New Mexico State to win the national championship. So when I was in Las Vegas, having said that, so there are limits on where my excitement is here, and they were among the worst 5 in the nation overall last season. But they are one of the few teams. I think I said there's 6 or 7 teams like this that have above average improvement metrics on both the offensive line and the defense. Um, that's a very good reason to hope for some improvement. The bigger reason to hope for improvement is they have a new coach by the name of Jerry Kill. And Jerry Kill, if you think back to, was it like about 10 or 12 years ago when Northern Illinois went to the, I believe it was the Orange Bowl with the group of fives at large bid. That was Jerry Kill. Jerry Kill completely built the Northern Illinois program. Then he went to Minnesota, who had basically just kind of spun their wheels forever, and he brought them up a significant level. He, in his very first game as Minnesota head coach, played at USC against Lane Kiffin in his first game as head coach of USC and almost won. I think that was like a one touchdown game, which is nuts. This is just one game removed from Pete Carroll at USC. Jerry Kill is an excellent, excellent, excellent head coach. Nevada is coached by Ken Wilson, which sounds like the name of a car dealer. He might turn out to be a great coach. He was a cheap hire. He was a position coach that has been in Nevada before. This just reeks of insider, stupid, do it on the cheap, and not really care. I remember that I was not impressed by his assistant coach hires. Kill is an absolute proven quantity. I think that this is going to come to, and like you said, Nevada loses a lot. I think that this is a matter of Jerry Kill can just get like, 15 guys together and get a football team together within an hour. And he's going against a first time head coach who probably has better pieces, but does not have experience in getting those pieces together. This is the one game as soon as I saw the slate and some numbers that I said, I'm definitely betting the game, and it's on New Mexico State. Might grab some money line too, but I really, really like grabbing those points.
Yeah, this is this is such a trap. Like I just like looking at this line. Like New Mexico State was not a great team last year. Um, Weirdly enough, New Mexico State somehow played Hawaii twice. I still have no idea how that happened. But in the regular season, they played Hawaii twice. But yeah, not a good team, and this screams to me just trap. This is a trap game, and if you're betting on Nevada, it's just a classic week one trap line.
Yeah. One other thing on that too, I actually think I saw on Twitter that there's only like 3,000 tickets left for this game, and Nevada doesn't care about football. Um, that could be sneaky, like snake pit time, where it
Maybe.
could be, you know, unforeseeably hostile.
Yeah. Well, this game is although. So here's the thing. Although it isn't, I think we're gonna dub this the unofficial Pac-12 After Dark game of the week because
Yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah.
not actually Pac-12. It's not officially Pac-12 After Dark, but it is at the 10 o'clock Eastern time slot, which is 7 o'clock West. So, yeah, it's the unofficial Pac-12 After Dark game of the week. The next other game, which is also the other unofficial Pac-12 After Dark game, is Vanderbilt at Hawaii. Vanderbilt, the worst team in the SEC, playing against Hawaii, the best team in Hawaii. Um, Probably the best team in Hawaii.
Yeah. You think?
Vanderbilt -8, which is offensive to Hawaii. I mean, you're going to Hawaii, and like Vanderbilt's where? It's in what, Tennessee, I think.
It's in Nashville. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Tennessee. You're traveling from Tennessee to Hawaii, and you're like, yeah, they're gonna win by 8. Like, come on. Like, no. This
You're an
is
SEC team, though.
the thing of it is, and this is how you could tell. Like, I love thinking of like what happens if certain teams lose games on Twitter, and sometimes I'll actually like sometimes what the most funny thing is then that usually happens. How funny is it when Hawaii wins this game and people on Twitter are gonna be like SEC, it just means more. Like it's gonna be so
Mm.
funny. Like we're gonna get so many great memes of this. So yeah, I'm on Hawaii here. For some reason it was 7 and it went down to like 6.5. Now it's up to 8. No idea why. But yeah, give me the Rainbow Warriors here on their own home turf, which is they're playing in the not condemned stadium. There is a different it's a different stadium. But yeah, I mean, okay, that's not great. That's not a great sign of the program, but I still think they could beat Vanderbilt, the worst team in the SEC. Um, the Commodores, yeah. Like are you just betting? Cause like see that I feel like that's the problem, right? People would be like, "Oh, they're the worst team in the SEC is the best team in the league." Like the SEC doesn't travel particularly well. Like a lot of the times, like the top teams in the SEC beat the best teams in other leagues. But when you get like a mid-tier SEC team or even a low-tier SEC team, they don't travel well. Like they'll go get destroyed by other teams, like other conferences.
Well, keep
So
going. You said mid tier and then lower tier.
there's
I think,
other
and then
teams.
we get to Vanderbilt,
Then you
right?
get to Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
They're a tier of their own. It's like the lower tier, and then there's like another tier, and then there's Vanderbilt. It's really bad. Like I don't even what like this is like again when we talk about future relegation, we're like okay, we know Rutgers is gonna get relegated. Like Vanderbilt's like they're not even like they know relegation's coming. Like that's it, we're done, guys, we're gone. Peace, guys, see ya. Like that's the Vanderbilt level. Um, Yeah, that's another future relegation target is Vanderbilt. I'm on the Rainbow Warriors here. Where are you on this game?
There's no way that I could really back either side with any degree of confidence. To me, just taking either side is like just throwing darts. But I mean, just because that's like, what was that? I think they used that one, Temple Duke. This is just like Temple Duke, where I just have no idea how we get to a number at all with any confidence. But the one thing that I know is Clark Lee is actually a good defensive coordinator. I think Vanderbilt's defense is horrible by SEC standards, and let me just see what they were last year. Um, yeah, nationally they're not great, but I think in year two, and the other thing too is as I look here, clearly they were not a team that we covered in depth when we did the SEC. They have a well above average improvement metric for defense, so they should be better just on that. And then you have year two under Clark Lee, who is a very good defensive mind. Um, I kind of like that aspect against a first time head coach who used to be a wide receiver coach. I like the hire. He brought in the offensive coordinator from Montana State. I think longer term, that's a clever move. I think in the near term, when you're overhauling everything, it's going to make things even worse. So I cannot trust anything that Vanderbilt does when they're touching the football, but I can trust them to some degree when they're defending the football. So I might go under the 53.5 that I'm seeing under the total here because there's actually few things that are better in life than betting on the under and watching that game until you're done. It's just a great watch.
What a sick thing to say. You're like, I want no points scored. I actually did one time. I did bet a Hawaii. It was actually one of the Hawaii New Mexico State games. I bet the under in that game, and then it was like they kept scoring, and it was like insanely high over. I think it was like 65, and they just kept scoring and scoring. I'm just like, they're not like that's so many points. They're not gonna get there, and they got there. They had to clear by like 14 points or something. But no, it's that's the last time I'll bet an under in a game in Hawaii. But to be fair, it's probably under's probably a decent bet there. My model's still not completely set up yet. But when my model is set up, I'll have a lot more confident of leans in these games. Like I'm just kind of picking by like gut in some of these ones right now, but longer term I should be able to I should do better on the model will have a better sense on these. So all right, so quick thing before we go. So this is what I love talking about this in term when we do Call of Duty. So for those unaware for the Call of Duty slate, what happens is for every week there's 3 days of games. There's 3 games on Friday, 4 on Saturday, and 3 on Sunday. And because it's an esport, you play most teams play 2 games. Like 8 teams play 2 games a week, and 4 teams only play 1 game a week. So what happens is if you're sitting here betting earlier in the week and you think like team A will beat team B on Friday and then they're a bigger underdog on say Sunday, then if they win on Friday, then the line will move before Sunday and then you lose the opportunity. So you want to place bets on games that you think the line will move on. So make bets you think are going to get closing line value. So just pointing that out for next week. So obviously there's a couple of games that would apply that, right? Obviously we're not seeing a ton of games this week. We only have about 6 or so. But someone that would be a candidate for that. On Saturday next week we have Texas State at Nevada. Texas State plus five, getting 5.5 on the road at Nevada. That's tempting because if Nevada, like, here's the thing, right? If Nevada loses to New Mexico State, does this line flip? Right? Like, or what is like maybe this is a 1 point game, like Nevada -1, right? That's a potential one to target. Um, Wyoming, if Wyoming were to beat Illinois, they're 3 point underdogs at home against Tulsa next week. UTEP is plus 31.5 against Oklahoma. That's probably not going to happen. New Mexico State, 37 point underdogs against Minnesota. There's even a money line in that game. So, do you
I didn't think about that. That's Jerry Kill going against his old school.
Well, okay, if New Mexico State was able to beat Nevada, like okay, maybe that line's not 37, but what is it, like 27? It's not going to move. Would it move
No,
10
it won't
points?
go
No.
that much.
What, like
It's just
32?
I'm just making a note. Like I like little angles like that. Like he might get a better performance against like his old school. It
Oh,
kind
it's
of
a
stunk
revenge
too
game.
because he actually had to retire. I don't know how he's coaching now. He had to retire because he had a problem with seizures, and it was
Mm.
really sad because he's a great coach. And he had a he was crying at his press conference that I ain't never done nothing else, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. He was just like a totally broken man. So it'd be an interesting angle going against his old employer.
That's yeah, that's sad. But at least he's back and he's doing okay now, so
Yeah.
that's good. Yeah. So any lines that you like to see just quickly before they move? Any lines? There's that line. We'll talk about some other next week. I'm seeing Central Michigan plus 21 against Oklahoma State. 11.25 is the money line. That's tempting.
Hmm.
That's a tempting one because that could potentially move. Some short money could come in on Central Michigan. Any other lines you see quickly? Not a huge breakout of them. We'll talk more about them next week. But any lines right now that you think could move by the time we talk again next week?
No, and this wasn't to just tweak you, but I grabbed some Utah um, at the Swamp just in case, just before it went up to 3, in case it goes to 3.
That's completely fair. I'm kind of waiting for it to go to 3. So because like this was 1, it's up to 2.5 now. I'm waiting. Once it gets to 3, I'll bet some at 3. That's deliberate. Notre Dame's up to 15.5 against Ohio State. That's changed. Oregon State -3 against Boise. That's not bad. Lots of good lines next week. Hawaii against Western Kentucky. 12.5 point dogs against Western Kentucky at home again, I think. Yeah, they're at home.
Yeah, Western Kentucky plays 13 games. Yeah, so
What? How is it
that's
even?
if you have a road game at Hawaii, you have the opportunity to play a 13th game.
Is that a law somewhere? Or
It's an NCAA thing just to encourage teams to go to Hawaii. Seriously.
that's no, that's crazy. But all right, that's. I mean, I guess you get
Yeah.
to fold like a trip into Hawaii in the game itself. So that's not bad. So all right,
No.
so no other lines from me. Yeah, we'll see you next week. We'll talk about all these games and well, obviously we'll recap what happened in northwestern Nebraska, and we'll talk about next week's games next week. And yeah, so other than that, football is back. If you're listening to this, you're probably only days or hours away from football. And yeah, enjoy it. Football season is back. See you, everybody.